pjnet.tv. Tonight it is 9 p.m. on the East Coast on this 17th day of August. And we have tonight slated not one, but two first-time guests coming your way. The first of which is Larry Leech, who is standing by in our green room. And our chat room is waiting. We are recording, we are streaming, and we're running the bumper. Let's count it down to Studio 20, starting now. Well, good evening, welcome. This is pjnet.tv. I'm Coach Prasick, and I am certainly glad to be here tonight. I was not actually here last night. That was pre-recorded, and I want to wish everybody a warm welcome if you're watching this online. We're glad you're here. We're glad that you stopped scrolling. But if you would like, you're invited to join the crowd over at the pjnet.tv chat room where you can watch the same program. It is about half the time that we have a first-time guest, and I lost count, but it's like 308 different first-time guests that we have had. I honestly don't know what took so long for us to cross paths with Larry Leech, who many of you already know. But if you didn't know him, he is, we won't have time to tell all that he does. He does so much. But he calls himself an editor, a coach, a writer. And what else do you do, Larry? Anything else?
I teach often. And first of all, thank you, Mark, for having me on the program tonight. I appreciate it, and it's good to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you.
I also teach at writers' conferences. So those are the four primary things that I do.
And you don't you don't dabble in any of those. I mean, how many? Give us some numbers.
Okay, writing. I have published 2,300 articles. I've ghostwritten 30 books. I've edited close to 400 manuscripts at this point. I've taught at 110 conferences nationwide, both for the inspirational market and general market. So and I've interviewed 13,000 people. So I like to talk to people.
You don't look old enough to have done that much, or but I guess you're keeping count. I'm older than you are. I'm way behind.
We all have our gifts, and we all have different paths in the publishing world.
Didn't I catch earlier that before you got into all this writing and all this stuff that you were a sports writer?
I was a sports writer for 9 years. I started 3 months out of high school in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, near where I was raised, just south of Pittsburgh, about an hour. My next door neighbor was the assistant sports editor, and going into my senior year, he approached me about working at the paper part-time. And I said I would love to, because I love sports. And he came back to me about a week later and said, the paper, they won't cover you insurance-wise when you're covering games, because you're not 18 yet. I'm like, okay. So I broadcast high school football games and basketball games for a year, and a year later, in August of '81, he came back and asked if I was still interested, and I said yes. And that started my career. It was August 25th, 1981.
Well, Larry, I used to do sports broadcasting, and radio, and I'll be honest with you, you just don't get that out of your blood too easy, No. Have you ever had the hankering to maybe go back and do it more?
No, I haven't. I miss being a sports writer at times, but sports are different now than they were in the 80s when I was a sports writer. There's a lot of work at night covering ball games and on weekends. Mm-hmm. I don't miss that. At my age, I enjoy being home in the evening and being home on the weekends, spend time with my wife. But no, I don't miss it a whole lot. Every once in a while, I'll be like, I wish I could cover a game or cover a golf event. I'm really into golf now.
Yeah, didn't I see a picture on Facebook today? You were with two other guys and living the dream.
Those were my two younger brothers, Randy and Andrew, and I was in Florida. I drove down Friday to pick up my mom and my mother-in-law for a birthday party this weekend. I golfed 18 with my brothers. Those are the two gentlemen that you saw, and I drove
Mhm.
back to South Carolina on Saturday. I was in Florida 24 hours and had to get a golf round in.
Well, your home is. Weren't you in Florida for a while?
I was born in Florida. I lived most of my life in Florida, and my wife and I moved to the Greenville, Spartanburg area 2 years ago. It was a coordinated move with my son, our son. He lived in Boston, and he moved to the Charlotte area. So we're about an hour apart.
Hmm.
He has a 3-year-old daughter, our granddaughter, our first. So we get to see her often.
So why the move? The
To be
rent come
nosy.
due?
Yeah. Well, down home, it's the mortgage payment.
Yeah.
Particularly we lived in the Orlando area, so price of housing there's a little crazy right now.
Yeah.
No,
If
we
you were you there when
we
Disney came?
oh yeah, we
I
live
remember.
25. We we live 25 minutes from Disney,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I have
nope.
family down in the Narcoossee area, if you know where that
Hmm.
is.
Yep, down by the
Right, right,
airport.
right there by the Mormon Ranch. In fact, my
Yep.
grandfather's orange grove butts up to the Mormon Ranch and Moss Creek and
Hmm.
all of.
Yep.
I have fond memories of that, but the Orlando today is nothing like. I don't need to go back. It's okay. It's
A lot of concrete and a lot of people.
oh
You
yeah.
know where we live now. There are 700 or 317,000 people in our county.
Hmm.
Where we lived in Orlando, we lived in Longwood, and an 8 mile radius, there were 2.5 million people.
Hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of people.
Not the same.
No.
Yeah. Larry, I'm fascinated. You have ghost written some books, and so often when we have a ghostwriter, we can't talk about the book. But two
Hmm.
books, you were a ghostwriter where your name is actually on the cover.
Yes. The two books you have there, Breakout and Be the Mentor. Breakout is about a gentleman who was the top drug lord in Minneapolis by the time he was 15. Obviously arrested numerous times, had a jailhouse conversion experience. So we wrote that. It was a short book, 91 pages, I think, because his audience, people in drug addiction and recovery and recovery programs, we didn't think they would read a long book. So we wrote a short book. So when he speaks, he has something that he could sell to go more in depth than just a 30 or 45 or 60-minute talk. Be the Mentor, I wrote for Tim DeTellis. He is, funny story how I met Tim. I'll go to that in a minute. It's a business book. It's a mentoring book for people in the business world.
Two very different books, Larry. Do you change lanes often, or
No, I don't change lanes often. In fact, Tim was just a strange circumstance. Let's put it that way. I frequented a Starbucks every day for 8.5 years near my home. And I walked in one day and Tim said, "Oh, I'm at your table. Let me move." Because I had a particular spot that I preferred because I was there
must
all the
be a
time.
Baptist Starbucks? It must.
So Tim said, "Oh, let me move. This is your spot. Every time I'm in here, this is where you sit." So he got up and went outside. And, we developed a friendship. And then he had this idea to write this book and he asked me to write it for him. So that's how I ended up with that ghostwriting project. Most of my ghostwriting projects were memoirs.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of them I have confidentiality clauses. I can't
All
talk
right.
about them, but these two I'm able to. And I'm working on a couple right now that I'll finish by the end of the year.
Hmm. Well, you've done so much. Is there anything? Do you have a bucket list?
Wow. You mean for the industry?
Well, for whatever. Is there anything you hadn't done? I mean, you
I have some fiction that I want to write and get out into market, my own stuff. And I have a couple things that I've worked on and a couple things that are probably pretty close. That would be one bucket item. Memoir wise, I would like to write a memoir for a musician.
hmm.
I'm a big music guy. I listen to music all day when I write, so I would like to do that. Sports figures. Um, I'll drop a name here. I would love to write a book about Jordan Spieth. I'm a big Spieth fan.
Tell me about your musical interest. I grew up in. I did some radio, and I'm a little older than you are. But what's your musical preference?
Not gonna lie, 80s metal.
Really?
That's my go-to. All those bands that came out in that era. That's my go-to. The energy in that music gets my blood going. It gets me energized.
Well, the difference in our age is apparent because my music would be what inspired that is Led Zeppelin. They were heavy metal when there
Nope.
was no such thing.
Yeah, when it was Aerosmith and Black Sabbath.
Hmm.
But yeah, and the big rivalry back in the '70s was who was more popular, Led Zeppelin or Kiss. Rolling Stone.
Well, yeah, yeah. Kiss was not exactly heavy metal, but they introduced something. Well, they did it in a bigger way. I think it wasn't what they were doing; it's the scope and the scale where they brought
Yeah,
theater to the stage, which wasn't
major.
new. But the
No,
scale they did it on broke. I mean, it opened up everything. And looking back on it, it was kind of sophomoric. I mean, it a bit over the top. And it's a four-piece band.
yeah, and with the exception of their one guitarist, none of them are great musicians, but it was something that caught people's attention back in the '70s. And
Hmm.
you know,
Well,
they have
eh,
they have staying power. They're still around.
well, and so many of the in the '80s, those groups, the Sid Vicious and all those, that lifestyle more so than the rock era before. Believe it or not, I mean, it
Mhm.
killed them. I mean,
Yeah,
they most of them died of drug overdose or they're
yeah.
rotting away in jail somewhere in there. But anyway, um, well, that would be interesting. Writing a book on a band. I don't have access to any bands. So Larry, let me ask you: when you've edited so many books, so when you write a book, who do you get to do the editing?
I am part of a writers group in the Greenville Spartanburg area with some multi-published authors, and I have someone from the group look at my stuff.
Hmm.
Um, One person in the group has sold over 1 million books in the inspirational market, and so I always have someone, even when I ghostwrite, I have someone edit behind me, even though I edit.
Really? Hmm.
Have a fresh set of eyes to look at it. Not just the line editing, but in a memoir, it's a combination of journalism and fiction. Journalism is the facts, the who, what, why, when, where, all of that. But the fiction part is the setting, description, the emotion that brings the story to life to feel like you're living it.
Hmm.
So I have someone read behind me even when I ghostwrite to make sure I'm hitting all my marks with my writing.
Well, tell us about your coaching.
Oh, I love coaching. I work predominantly with new writers, although I have some repeat clients. I have one gentleman from Texas will later this year work on the sixth book together. But the coaching is one on one, customized coaching for each author. And we work through their book a little bit at a time, anywhere from 20 to 40 pages, depending on how clean the writing is. And I spend an hour to an hour and a half reviewing material, making comments that we'll discuss, do some light editing, and then we spend an hour on a Zoom call to discuss everything.
Hmm.
And while they do the rewrites for that particular section, I look at the next 20 to 40 pages and we just systematically go through the book in that order. And after all the rewrites are done, I do a full manuscript review where I read it from start to finish.
Hmm.
And then we just there's anything we need to tweak or fine tune at that point, we do another Zoom call. It usually takes an hour to 2 hours to do a full manuscript review, and then we work on a book proposal if we need to, or if they already have a publisher, we send it off to the publisher.
When you've coached so many people, Larry, I can't help but think there's some recurring mistakes that you keep seeing and having to point out.
Hmm.
What are some of the
Yes.
common ones?
Overuse of the word that's an easy one to fix. I have something called a terrible 30 that I send clients. It was, it is typically, it is a generic pronoun, was is typically a passive verb. So you're starting off telling us that you're going to tell us
Mm-hmm.
something instead of showing us, which is a big key in writing. Another one would be lack of emotion.
Hmm.
Even in fiction, people are great at describing a scene, the description, the setting, but the emotion in fiction is what draws the reader to the character. Suzanne Collins, who wrote Hunger Games, is phenomenal at that, and I use the Hunger Games series as an example often when I coach fiction. She is Stephen King is another one. I know a lot of people in the inspirational market are not fans of Stephen King, but he just gently touches that emotional button all the way through
Mm-hmm.
until a point you realize, particularly in his horror, that you're holding the book like this or your e-reader. And it's just because he's ever so slightly touched that emotional button. Nicholas Sparks does it well in his romantic novels.
You've been doing this long enough. What's changed looking back when you started?
Authors, whether they are traditionally published or self-published, have to think and act like a publishing house. The days of turning in a manuscript to a publisher and letting the publisher do all the marketing, all that kind of work, that ship sailed 20, 25 years ago. I have a friend, for an example, her first book out, she sold 5,000 copies. Not a bad number to start out with. The publisher sold 2,500. She sold 2,500 on her own through marketing, speaking engagements, social media marketing. Publishers in book proposals. I coach book proposals as well as full length manuscripts. One of the things that we work on the most is the marketing section. We There was a woman recently that I coached had one paragraph of marketing on her proposal when we started. By the time we were done, she had worked hard to get it to 4 pages. When it went to pub board, she passed pub board in less than 10 minutes because of her marketing. She was able to show the publisher, I can sell this book, and these are the avenues where I can sell this book.
Larry, we've only got a couple minutes left. I gotta ask you. You have been a coach and a mentor to so many. Who's
Mhm.
Larry's mentor?
I have a mentor. Am I allowed to drop a name?
Sure. If you, yeah.
Cease Murphy. Cease Murphy, who wrote 90 Minutes in Heaven and Gifted Hands. Cease took me under his wings many, many years ago, and I call Cease my mentor. And those who don't know Cease, Cease is a jewel. Cease is in his mid 80s now. He's retired from writing and speaking at conferences, but Cease has mentored hundreds upon hundreds of writers in the inspirational market, and I'm fortunate enough to be one.
Well, we still got a minute left. You do a lot of speaking at conferences. You mentioned.
Yes.
Then COVID came along. I guess it's rebounding now. How did you adapt during that time when there just weren't any conferences to speak at?
A number of the conferences shifted to online only, either using Zoom or other programs, video chat programs. Did that probably for a year, year and a half. That was very different because at a conference you like the networking and sit and have lunch with someone or
Hmm.
meet someone in a coffee shop. But last year, late last year, actually early last year, a lot of conferences went back to in person.
Yeah.
A couple of them did a hybrid.
Yeah.
They did so, but very different.
Well, I'm looking forward to everything getting back to, I'm glad it came along that we discovered digital ways to reach out. I wish it wouldn't
Mhm.
take COVID for us to realize that.
Yeah,
But you made it through. But Larry, gosh, you're so busy. We appreciate the fact that you have taken time out to share with us tonight. You're quite an accomplished already, and I don't think you're done from the sounds of it. But thank you for
I don't,
sharing.
I don't, I don't think so. I think God's got plans for me.
As long as you're drawing a breath, sir, you are
Yeah,
correct. But hey, thanks for taking time out to share with us, and we appreciate it. And come back and see us once in a while.
Mark, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation tonight.
All right, brother, we love you. Thank you so much. That was Larry Leech. Many of you have heard of him at least, but now you heard him in person. Okay, um, we're not done. We've got another first-time guest coming our way in just a few moments. Before I leave and take a little break while we switch things around in preparation for our next guest, I would like you to use that time to accept a challenge in the form of two questions. Ready? What is the boldest thing that you have ever done for Jesus Christ? Second question. How long ago was that? Whatever your answers are, it's my prayer and my hope and your challenge to never be satisfied with either answer.